The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Victor had always believed that the darkest truths reveal themselves only when a man is pushed to the brink of losing everything he holds dear. When he set out to kill Matt, to eliminate the last remaining threat to his fractured family, he thought he understood the magnitude of what he was about to do. It was not murder in his mind. It was protection, the same instinct that had guided him through every war, every betrayal, every moment when the name Newman had been threatened by forces lurking within and outside their world. But as he tightened his grip on the thought of ending Matt's life once and for all, a series of small, almost invisible details began to rise in his mind, each one insignificant on its own, yet together forming a pattern so disturbing that Victor felt the ground shift beneath him. Why did Matt hate him with such a visceral, bone-deep hostility? Villains often had motives, money, revenge, power, but Matt's hatred was different. It was personal, obsessive, shaped by something older than their conflict. Matt's obsession with the Newman family was not random, it was deliberate, irrational, rooted in a longing so fierce it bordered on pathological. He didn't merely want to ruin Victor, he wanted to be seen by him. He didn't just want to destroy Nick, he wanted to replace him. Victor had dismissed this fixation as psychological instability, the desperate hunger of a man craving significance. But there was something else beneath it, something almost familiar. The realization began with a gesture Victor had seen only once before. When Matt confronted him earlier, bleeding and furious, he had curled his right hand into a half fist and touched 2 fingers to his thumb. The same nervous habit Nick had inherited from Victor, one that appeared only when fear and fury collided within them. Victor had noticed Nick do it as a child, especially during moments of deep insecurity, long before he understood the burdens of being a Newman. And when Victor saw Matt perform the same gesture with unconscious precision, something cold and ancient stirred in him. At first he dismissed it. Coincidence. Mimicry. Nothing more. But coincidences rarely existed in Victor's world. He remembered the way Matt's voice had wavered with unprocessed resentment, the way he spat Victor's name as if it had been carved into his bones, the aching vulnerability behind the rage, as though he had been starving for something he never received. Victor replayed the details, Matt's age, his birthplace, rumors of a hospital scandal decades ago, a nurse dismissed under suspicious circumstances, Nikki's memories of a difficult delivery blurred by sedation and exhaustion. 100 fragments of history, meaningless when apart, suddenly merged into a monstrous possibility. Could Matt be his son? The question struck him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless in a way no enemy had ever managed. The thought was too absurd to entertain, yet too haunting to dismiss. If true, it meant the enemy he sought to destroy was a child stolen from him, a child raised without love, without guidance, shaped by abandonment that wasn't abandonment at all but deception. It meant that the rage Matt carried wasn't arbitrary, it was the rage of a son who sensed, without knowing why, that something had been taken from him. Victor tried to push the idea away, but the more he resisted, the stronger it grew. Every action Matt had taken, his obsessive fixation on Nick, his desire to dismantle everything Victor built, his violent need for recognition, suddenly aligned into a devastating narrative. Villains did not seek to replace their victims' sons. Only lost sons did. As Victor's mind descended into the shadows of the past, he remembered a rumor Nikki once whispered during one of the darkest periods of their relationship, something about a nurse who had handled Nick's birth with an unusual level of control, insisting that the baby needed additional care before being handed to the exhausted parents. At the time, Victor dismissed it as postpartum paranoia. But now, with Matt's face burned into his memory, everything twisted into terrifying clarity. What if the newborn returned to Nikki's arms that day had not been Nick at all? What if the real child of Nikki and Victor had been taken, sold, switched, stolen, and raised by someone who resented the Newmans so deeply that the child grew into a man shaped by bitterness and longing? What if Matt had been deprived of a life he was meant to have? The horror of the thought nearly brought Victor to his knees. His desire to kill Matt evaporated, replaced by a grief so sharp it struck through the armor he had worn his entire life. He felt betrayed not just by fate, but by the very fabric of history he believed he understood. Every action he had taken against Matt, every moment of rage, every second of justified violence now carried the unbearable possibility that he had been unknowingly at war with his own blood. Matt's hatred suddenly made tragic sense. A child who grew up without belonging would always turn feral. A son deprived of a father's presence might spend a lifetime attacking the ghost of a man he never met. Matt's hunger to destroy Nick wasn't motivated by envy of success, it was envy of legitimacy. Nick had lived the life Matt should have had: safety, guidance, love, identity. Matt had been left with nothing but the echo of a truth he never learned. As Victor stood in the quiet of his private study that night, hands shaking, breath uneven, he confronted a truth that felt too monstrous to speak aloud: he might have sought to kill his own son. The ache in his chest expanded until it felt like his ribcage would split open. His mind traveled through memories of fatherhood, how fiercely he had protected Victoria, how deeply he had fought for Adam, how much he had sacrificed for Nick. And he imagined another son, one he never knew, growing up in the dark corners of the world, unloved, unwanted, unclaimed. A child who may have spent nights wondering why his parents never came for him. Victor felt something inside him fracture. And yet, despite the horror, another instinct clawed its way to the surface: the instinct to know. He needed proof, needed truth, needed certainty that would either redeem him or destroy him. He needed to understand the origin of Matt's hatred, the reason destiny had pushed father and son into a battlefield neither recognized until now. Victor began searching for hospital records, archived documents, witness testimonies from decades earlier. He reached out to private investigators with orders sharper than any he had issued before: find the truth, no matter the cost. Every answer they uncovered only deepened the nightmare. A nurse had vanished after Nikki's delivery. 2 infants had been temporarily misplaced due to a clerical error later covered up. Medical charts had inconsistencies. A doctor rumored to have gambling debts went missing months after the births. Everything pointed to a massive scheme, the kind that preyed on the wealthy and vulnerable, switching babies for profit while leaving no trace. And then it hit him like a final blow: Matt's exact age matched the timeline. His birthplace matched the hospital. The emotional intensity he carried matched the fury of a stolen child. Victor pressed a trembling hand against his forehead, struggling to breathe. He no longer knew whether he wanted the truth or feared it. At the same time, he felt an undeniable pull, a need that rose from the deepest part of him. If Matt truly was his son, if fate had thrown them into this tragic dance, then Victor needed to face him not as an enemy but as a father. Yet the cruel irony remained. Matt lay dying, unaware of this truth, unaware that the man he had spent his life despising might have been searching for him all along. What kind of universe could be cruel enough to design such a twist? What kind of writer would create a narrative where a father unknowingly shoots his own son? The very thought made Victor's body tremble. But the truth, once awakened, cannot be buried. And Victor Newman, for all his power, found himself standing at the edge of a revelation that could destroy his family, rewrite every chapter of their history, and expose wounds deep enough to bleed for generations. Matt might have been the enemy. Matt might have been the monster. But Matt might also be a Newman. And if that was true, then Victor had not saved his family. He had shattered it. The hospital room where Matt lay dying was colder than any battlefield Victor had ever stood upon, not because of its sterile air or the hum of machines struggling to keep a fading pulse alive, but because of the unbearable weight of a truth Victor could no longer escape. The room felt suspended between 2 worlds, the world where Victor believed he had destroyed an enemy, and the world where he now feared he had destroyed something far more fragile, far more precious. A son he never knew existed. The filtered light from the hallway spilled across Matt's motionless form, illuminating the sharp angles of a life carved by bitterness and loneliness. Tubes fed into his arms, monitors blinked with the indifferent rhythm of a heart slowly giving up, and in the faint rise and fall of Matt's chest, Victor saw not a villain but a tragedy. He moved closer, each step heavy, as if the air itself resisted his presence. All his life, Victor had been a man who entered rooms with an aura of command, a force that shifted the balance of power. But here, he felt no power, only dread. He had faced corporate giants, political sharks, and world-class manipulators without blinking, yet as he approached Matt's bedside, he felt something fracture inside him. He was not confronting a criminal now. He was confronting the possibility of a lifetime of stolen years, of a bond severed before it could ever form. Matt stirred as Victor's shadow fell across him, his eyelids fluttering with the fragile instinct of a dying man sensing the arrival of someone who mattered, even if he didn't understand why. When his gaze finally focused, it was not with the defiance that had fueled their past encounters but with a strange, almost childlike bewilderment, as if some part of him recognized Victor not as an enemy but as something painfully familiar. His breathing hitched, shallow and uneven, yet the instinct to speak pulled at him. Victor did not sit. He did not lean forward. He simply stood still, unable to move, unable to choose between anger and grief, justice and mercy, truth and denial. Everything inside him was torn. Only the barely audible rasp of Matt's breath broke the silence, a reminder that time was running out. And then, slowly, Matt gathered what remained of his strength, not to confess crimes, not to beg for forgiveness, but to relinquish the truth buried deepest within him. He revealed, not in words, not in clear sentences, but in halting fragments of emotion, the life he had lived without understanding its origin. A life defined by a persistent sense of being unwanted. A life in which he searched for purpose in all the wrong places, grasping at shadows because he felt destined for something more but never knew what. He admitted, in broken breaths, that he had always felt as if someone out there should have loved him, should have found him, should have claimed him. He confessed that his obsession with Victor was never about power at all. It was about the inexplicable pull he felt toward the Newman family, a gravitational force he could neither explain nor resist. To Victor, every word hit with the force of a lifetime of regret condensed into a single moment. Matt didn't know he had been stolen. He didn't know he had been abandoned not by choice but by a cruel twist of fate. He didn't know that the very family he tried to destroy might have been the family that should have saved him. His hatred had been the desperate rage of a child who felt invisible to the world, not knowing the world had been cheated of him just as he had been cheated of the world. The realization crushed Victor. His breath deepened, his chest tightened, and his eyes filled with a sorrow he had spent decades pretending he didn't possess. He saw now that Matt had never wanted to replace Nick out of malice. He wanted to replace him because somewhere deep inside, something in him whispered that he belonged where Nick stood. It wasn't envy. It was instinct. The instinct of a son robbed of his birthright and forced to build his identity on the fragments of a lie. As Matt struggled through his confession, his face contorted not with pain but with the anguish of incomprehensible loss. He spoke of nights spent staring at ceilings, wondering why he felt incomplete. He described the sense of always standing outside of something, some warmth, some belonging, that he could never access. He admitted that sometimes he imagined what it would be like to have a father who fought for him, a family that stood behind him, a name that meant something. He felt compelled to destroy Victor not because Victor had wronged him, but because Victor represented everything he had been denied. And Victor, standing motionless, felt the full weight of fatherhood crashing upon him in a way he had never known. All the pride, all the victories, all the legacies he had built felt meaningless against the revelation that one of his children might have lived an entire life believing he was worthless. The ache in Victor's chest became unbearable. He felt his age more than ever, not in body but in soul. This was not a battle he could win by strategy or force. This was a wound that no amount of power could heal. Matt's breaths grew shallower, his eyes unfocused yet still searching Victor's face with the pleading gaze of someone who didn't understand why the person standing over him mattered so much. He had no idea that the man he hated might have been the one man who would have given him everything. He had no idea that Victor's silence was not indifference but devastation. Victor's hands trembled. Not with fear, not with anger, but with a grief so profound it hollowed him out. He wanted to speak, to tell Matt the truth, to promise that he would uncover every secret, every buried document, every lost moment. He wanted to tell him that he was not unwanted, that he had been taken, stolen, robbed of a life he should have lived by Victor's side. He wanted to call him son, if only once, before death could steal the chance forever. But the words would not come. Not because Victor lacked courage, but because his voice broke under the weight of a truth he had no right to declare without proof. And so he stood there, silently, as a lifetime of pain poured out of Matt in ragged whispers. For the first time in his life, Victor felt helpless, not against an enemy, not against fate, but against the cruelty of time. The one thing he could never defeat. Matt's final moments unfolded slowly, painfully, as though death itself hesitated to take him before the truth could be revealed. His breathing weakened to the faintest tremble. His fingers twitched once as though reaching for something he had chased his entire life. His eyes fluttered, not in fear but in resignation, as if acknowledging that whatever he had been searching for was slipping away from him once more. Victor leaned closer. Not touching him, not speaking, but bearing witness to the agony of a man who had lived and died without knowing who he truly was. It was the greatest tragedy Victor had ever seen, and he had seen many. This one, however, pierced through every layer of defense he had built over the decades. In Matt's final exhale, Victor heard not the end of a life, but the end of a question that would haunt him forever: what if he had been my son? The monitor beside the bed flattened into a steady tone. A thin, merciless line cutting across the screen. Nurses rushed in. A doctor whispered something about time of death. But Victor heard none of it. He felt only the hollow ache expanding inside him, widening into a chasm of regret so deep he feared he might be swallowed by it. He stood unmoving as they covered Matt's body with a sheet, the same way hospitals had done countless times before with strangers. But Matt was no longer a stranger, not to Victor. Not after what he had confessed. Not after the unbearable possibility that he had spent his life searching for the very man now standing over him. As the sheet settled over Matt's still form, Victor tightened his jaw, holding back the collapse threatening to break through his composure. He did not cry. Victor Newman did not cry. But something in him shattered so quietly that no one in the room noticed except him. He turned away, but not because he wanted to leave. He turned away because he had to gather the strength to face what came next: the investigation, the family, the truth. The unbearable need to know whether the man who died on that bed had been the greatest enemy of his life, or the greatest loss. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but the echo of Matt's dying confession followed him like a shadow.